We begin tonight with big breaking news on Boeing, the company out with new numbers on the impact of the grounded 737 MAX planes. Let's get to Phil LeBeau with the very latest. Phil.
Melissa, not surprisingly, Boeing will take a big hit when it comes to the Q2 earnings that it reports next week. Let's run down the numbers the company announced within the last half hour. It's taking a $4.9 billion after-tax charge. That works out to $8.74 a share. That's for the second quarter. Essentially, it comes down to the 737 MAX. They say it's due to concessions and considerations they're going to be needing to make to customers, not only those they've made in the second quarter, but extending out over the next couple of years. Revenue and pre-tax earnings, they're going to drop by $5.6 billion in the second quarter, or they're going to be reduced by that much in the second quarter. Production costs in the second quarter up an estimated $1.7 billion, but we should point out that is accounted for over the life of the program. So it's going to be extended out over many years since they've got more than 4,000 737 MAXs on order. The assumption from Boeing at this point is that the airplane returns to service in the fourth quarter. Now, we should point out that is a very general, vague assumption. They are not saying for sure that it will happen. They're not putting a date out there. They're simply saying their assumption is that it returns to service in the fourth quarter. In terms of production, which is what so many people have been focused on, it remains at 42 per month. And the company is saying, as part of this new guidance that they've issued, they still believe they can get to 57 per month at some point in 2020. And in terms of guidance, Melissa, remember, they pulled it after the first quarter. They said, we're not really sure what's going on with the MAX at this point. Therefore, we're not giving guidance. Today, they've said they will give guidance for 2019 at some point in the future. When remains unknown. Melissa?
At a future date is the exact wording. Phil, I mean, what were analysts expecting in terms of this charge? And how should we extrapolate, or should we extrapolate this charge in the second quarter to future quarters if the 737 MAX remains grounded for longer, for beyond the fourth quarter?
Well, I think most of the assumptions were roughly in this neighborhood. I've not seen a definitive, hey, we're expecting this charge. That's the consensus on the street. But I know most analysts that I've talked with were around this area, this, $4.9 billion after tax. In terms of whether or not you can extrapolate this and say, look, they didn't deliver in the second quarter on the 737 MAX. They didn't deliver in the third quarter, or may not deliver in the third quarter. Therefore, we should see the same charge. I wouldn't do that, Melissa, because remember, there are certain costs in here that they are going to be accounting for over the life of this program. And in terms of that concessions of that $4.9 billion, that's for concessions and other considerations to customers. They make it very clear in this announcement that's not just for the second quarter, while that's where the charge is being taken, it's over many years. So we may see a charge for the third quarter related to the MAX, but it may not be at the same degree that we're seeing here.
Phil, it's Karen. Let me ask you something. Do you have any idea about the purchase price of a 737 MAX, what it was a year ago or 6 months ago, even before any of this happened, and what it is now? Because this is their, future for years.
Yeah, well, the book price hasn't changed, Karen. They still list it, and I don't know the exact amount, but I do know that it hasn't changed. But keep in mind, when they sell these planes, they never sell them at the price that's listed there. It usually is at a great discount to the price that they listed at. And so as a result, it's hard to sit there and say, well, look, they're knocking off this amount on each of these planes. I think it depends on the customer. It depends on the size of the order. And it also depends on, to a certain extent, the customer saying, look, we're paying the price in some fashion, whether it's leasing other aircraft, whether it's changing our schedule, reducing the amount of flights that we have there. All of that is factored into how much the end price will be.
All right, Phil, thanks a lot for all the details. Phil LeBeau with the latest on Boeing. Shares, by the way, up nearly 2% in the after-hours session. We should note that the stock was down more than 2% today. Guy, what do you make of this?
I think it's gotten, obviously, you just said it just got back what it lost during the day. At least you have a degree of certainty now in terms of a number. I mean, they basically came out and told you what they expect it to be, what they're taking in terms of a charge. I'll still say this. I mean, this stock, when it troughed back in March, it traded basically down to 365, sideways, slightly lower, sideways, slightly higher. But here we are now at effectively the same price. I'll still say this. Valuation to me makes sense. I think you're underestimating the defense component of this company, which is not nearly as big as commercial airlines. I get it, but still significant. And I think you can own it in earnings. I would understand why you'd want to avoid it, but I still think this is a pretty compelling play. Yeah, but here it is, the headline risk.
But you're still going to have to train people on how to use this plane. Still, even when it does come back, there could be a year-long training program on this. So if you have it, maybe you hold on to it. I would not step in and be a buyer right now.
Well, let me ask you this. When the 737 MAX goes back into service, let's say it goes back into service December 5th, Dan, you're going to take your family on a holiday and Christmas. Are you going to go on a 737 MAX? You're going to wait?
I was on a flight yesterday, and the flight attendant went out of her way to say you are on a 737, blah, 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 not a MAX. You know, I mean, this is definitely top of mind. I just want to say one thing about, the headline risk. So Guy is saying that he thinks the valuation makes sense. If you think that they get above $20 in earnings next year, then the valuation makes sense here if you're willing to kind of take a little time with this thing, because it's going to really, it's going to take months to figure it out. I'll just make one point. This stock is still up 12%. It's trading on the year. It's trading at the same level where it was when the Lion Air crash happened in October. And there was another crash. 350 people have died. If this was any other sort of company, I don't know why this stock is still trading with a 3 handle. Because just remember last year when Apple, oh my goodness, iPhone sales were slowing and China was weak, that stock sold off 35% peak to trough.
And nobody died.
Right.
Exactly.
Although, let me ask something, Dan. Don't you think that the stock we've seen just a drumbeat of terrible news, right? Obviously, the 2 crashes, horrific news, and then the delays, and then the uncertainty about how do they train the pilots, and all of that, though, and then the air show where they sold the first day nothing, and it seems to me like the drumbeat of bad news is actually played out. Here's a gigantic charge. Nobody cares. It seems to me like that's already all played out. And
if there's nothing else. What happens if there's one other instance? There's going to be a learning curve.
Each time it trades down less on bad news.
Sure, but once you get that the pilots can't be trained and it's a little more difficult. At first they just said it was going to be a software fix. Then the pilots have to be retrained. The story keeps getting longer. Granted, your point I agree with, but the story's not over.
The stock is sort of bottomed, even with whatever bad news is coming out.
It's trading decently in the face of all this bad news.
100%.
Isn't that the definition of good price action?
The fact that it's up over 11% year to date is phenomenal.
Isn't that one reason to give it a chance, though?
I've owned this stock on and off over the years, and the people that own the stock believe in it forever. I sold it up 150 points. I thought it was a hero. I can't go back into it right now. I mean, this is just crazy. Even though the valuation is not nuts, it just feels like I'm gambling with a $100 move.